Well, hello, everybody. This is the Kingdom Mapping Podcast. This is our very first episode, and there's nothing fancy about it. The truth of the matter is, Kingdom Mapping is something that's a new term that I coined from years of research. And basically, being in ministry school and realizing that history was a passion as well as the word, and of course, connecting it to the land and the culture and the people. That's what Kingdom Mapping really is all about. And it's really just learning to see how the news, how history, and where we're at intertwines with the spiritual realm. Now, my name is Nicole Hawkins. You can call me Nix. And basically, I'll be the host of this show. I will have guests on time to time where we're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about their culture, their region, and how it all falls into place and where are we at on the timeline. So first of all, what is kingdom mapping in a more specific sense? It's really a multi-dimensional view of history and the spiritual realm and its effects on the land and the culture. It looks at the people, their purpose, usually from a First Chronicles perspective. But if you look at the book of Acts, where you're looking at chapter 17, you're kind of seeing that who we are and what we become is not even just about when we exist, but where we exist. And so for this show, we're going to have different segments. And I think it's cool to always start off with something old, something new. And I'm living in Orlando right now. And right now in Orlando, Florida, which a lot of people think of many different things, it's called, one of our nicknames is the City Beautiful, which we're going to get into the history of that. But what people don't know is two interesting things about Orlando. Is that number one, Walt Disney, which is known for Orlando regarding Walt Disney World, his dad lived here many years before he was even born and had really an effect not just on Orlando, but us being called the City Beautiful. And currently, there's a renovation happening downtown on Church Street. Church Street is not only known worldwide, but it's also known through its name, and it's actually taking on a different spin than what you might think. So let's get into it. If we're looking at kingdom mapping, we're not just going to look at the land, we're not going to look at the spiritual, we're going to look at everything and why it matters. So first of all, the history of the City Beautiful. Now what's crazy is we've seen this all over. I've seen it all when I grew up, the City Beautiful, on when you're coming out of the airport, when you're going to certain places. But what does it really mean? What people don't know is actually a movement that began in 1893. So you may have heard this in history class, where the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This is the famous World's Fair. They threw this idea because, if you don't know, a lot of cities had fires. And all the cities at this time wanted to rebuild America and make America a place where we can come and see just the outrageous, right? So different cities actually wanted to get money to rebuild their city. Chicago was one of them. And Chicago had just had a terrible fire. And you had D.C., you had Philly, you had all these different cities, more or less in the Northeast, who were competing to be rebuilt into this wonderful idea of what a city should look like, right? And believe it or not, at the last minute, Chicago's people, which is where I'm from, they came through with more money. I'm talking about millions of dollars to rebuild Chicago into a beautiful place. At this time, Elias Disney, which was Walt Disney's dad, was looking for work, and he was great at construction. He actually is from the Midwest, and he went to Chicago because he heard there was a new, really big project rolling out. And everything, timing, as you know, in culture and history, intersected and fell into his lap. So he actually got a job, and they wanted to build Chicago as this beautiful white city. So in order to make it exactly what a quote-unquote city should look like, they basically built streets where when you would go downtown, the streets would go one way on one side and come up another way on another side. Does that sound familiar? They would have parks and green spaces. They would have like little lakes. They would have the most beautiful structures and skyscrapers, and they would rebuild the place, and it would basically show how this city is not only progressing, but it's exposing the best of what it can be. And believe it or not, Chicago not only won the bid, but they were the home of one of the biggest world fairs to this day. We have centuries of ideas that came out of this one World Fair. Elias Disney, believe it or not, was one of the lead men who helped with the blueprints to come into fruition. Now, mind you, he's married, he has 2 kids, he's doing this thing. And what happens? He actually moves to Florida, but becomes a mailman after this project is over. So you build this masterful city, which then, as you can imagine, every city in the country starts to mimic their downtown locations in the same manner, including Orlando, Florida. And he actually moved back to the Midwest and actually had the rest of his kids, which Walt Disney was one of them. That's where the City Beautiful came from. They nicknamed this movement. We want to build our city like we saw in Chicago, called the City Beautiful. But when Orlando was being built, right, many years later, they didn't know what to call themselves. So they decided, we're going to build the beginning when we had our fire, believe it or not, and our great fruit freeze in the almost 5-6 years later. They wanted to rebuild the city in a way that would just pull everyone in, and they actually took this project that Elias Disney actually helped roll out to rebuild downtown Orlando, which is actually called College Park. And they basically, from Lake Eola, if you know Orlando, Florida, and all the streets like Orange Avenue and Roslyn Avenue, they started to rebuild the city the same way. Why is this important? Because when God is moving on a city, he has a blueprint. And we as Christians who live here believe that was no accident we were called the City Beautiful. The kids in school felt like when they heard about this movement and their cities being built over from scratch, we lost we are the birthplace of orange juice, believe it or not, and the global juice market that's worth billions of dollars actually started in Orlando first. So now you're rebuilding a city. You lose all the oranges everywhere in Central Florida. How are we going to rebuild our city after a fire? They actually mimicked what Chicago did, and they actually rebuilt it and named it the City Beautiful. So we have a gorgeous downtown setup, which is actually where my church is located. And this now brings us to Church Street. Church Street was actually named Church Street not because it was a cute name. It was the only street in downtown Orlando that had the most churches on it. Unfortunately, over the years, it became the place of entertainment. Once we took our eyes off God and we just moved with the times, it's become one of the sole centers of club entertainment. If you want to find a nightclub, actually, that's the best place to go. So this kingdom mapping is seeing history through the eyes of the people, the land, and the culture. And that's actually our something old, something new. Now, you can kind of see now, I'm going to kind of stick on the Disney end here, because now, before I get to that, Church Street's actually being renovated. So this year, the city of Orlando has went ahead and announced that their redevelopment agency is doing a groundbreaking ceremony very soon of phase 1 of the Church Street Festival Street project, because it has now become a place where people love to hang out and party. So they're actually going to transform from Church Street to Garland Avenue, Magnolia, which is just a couple block section of downtown Orlando where people can hang out, visit, and there's always a constant festival feeling going on. So that is the plan of, so something old is beautiful history. Something new, Church Street, which once was the place where if you needed protection and a church you'd go to, is now the place where people can party. Those things intertwine because it's the same area of downtown Orlando. But if we jump into history, let's go into Walt and Elias just a little bit, because there were 2 major pioneers that have actually changed not only our city but the world. First of all, we have Walt and Elias Disney. Now, if you don't know, Walt was actually born in the Midwest, and he actually was renamed after their pastor. So their pastor's name was Elias. So his name is Walt Elias Disney. His parents got radically saved in a revival in the Midwest, and they became deacons of the church. So, of course, Elias told the pastor, if we have a boy, we're naming him after you, which is actually his name was Walt, and of course you have Elias. So the pastor's name was Walt. And basically, as they're going to church, Walt Disney himself did not like church. He was not crazy about it. He actually was a PK. And when he got a chance to get out of church services, he would run to the movies, and then therefore, his imagination took off, and he realized he wanted to create films and do animation. And, of course, what happens later, many years later, after his parents have passed, they are about to have the New York World's Fair back in 1964. So almost 67 years later, Walt Disney has become an animator. He started his own animation company, and he has already started the Walt Disney World in California, right? And he's like, man, I need a new place to put another world, because when he built it in Anaheim, everyone was able to build their shops, and it increased, of course, land property. And he hated it. He wanted a place where he could build a theme park where people would have to take their time and not be taken up by the traffic and all those things. So he actually designed and bought thousands of acres of property, which I can do a whole episode on this. And he, of course, was working on rides that might work. So he came up with the Small World. He came up with all the rides that we have. Some of the most famous ones, Epcot, right, which is the famous, just basically structure of how the world can be in outer space. All these ideas. And when he got to enter into the New York World's Fair, he had his own section called the Florida Project. And he wanted to tell investors, if you'll give me money, I can make lots, I can turn it over, and this theme park will be a success. Even though the Anaheim location was doing well, he knew that his next step would be bigger. And he was looking at land in Orlando, right? And he went ahead and tested. They did not think it would work. And his attraction space at the fair blew up. It was so big, and because of his name and the movies he was starting to make, he made so much money just from the fair. The investors happily gave him the rest of the funds. And that is actually how Walt Disney World was actually birthed into a project where now it is the biggest employer of Florida. And all this happening in the City Beautiful. I don't think it's quite a surprise that his father and him made such an impact in Orlando. But what I want to ask you is, if someone like that burst into a family of faith but rejected what God had for him, what could we be carrying? Who are we mentoring that could become the Disneys of God? Now, another pioneer I want to talk about is Sam Jones. This man was actually a former slave. He had loved to work with the community, and he actually was raised and grew up. And even though we didn't have slavery plantations in Orlando, we had orange groves, which were called orange plantations. So Sam worked on these plantations with his wife, Penny, and they just felt like, this can't be all for our people. What can we do for our people to make them better? So he started to gather the community leaders in the area and looked for local African Americans and others and helped them find a place to stay. So when they would come to Orlando, they wanted to get to a place where they could live and feel safe and not try to integrate because it was so dangerous back then. So Sam Jones himself started to build a strong neighborhood of houses. And he got a lot of funding, and he was a man of faith, and he believed that African Americans, so he'd help the homeless, he helped those who were down and out, and he wanted to leave a positive impact where kids would be excited to go to school. So he started a small school called the Jonestown Academy, and all the kids whose parents were slaves and worked on the groves would go to this school. Because the school was so well done, the people of Orlando and the city helped him make this become a school. He also started one of the oldest black churches in Orlando called Mount Olive CME, which is Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. And he did this in downtown Orlando. So on the parts of City Beautiful, you have more of the affluent white and all the rich neighborhoods. And also then you have on the other side of downtown Orlando, you have Sam Jones and all the slaves building a safe, affluent black community rising up at the same time. What makes him so famous is Jones High School, which is now the oldest high school and the oldest black high school in Orlando, started to have a strong band presence. To this day, some of the greatest band leaders that take on FAMU and BCC that we have seen on The Ellen Show, Good Morning America, all of the biggest TV shows and movies in the world came from that school. And that's how he left his imprint. And of course, this all happened in the City Beautiful. So what's the point of me bringing this up? I'm challenging you that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who you know or where you grew up. What are you carrying that can make your region beautiful? When you listen to this come clearly, is there a blueprint in your heart that's not just for you, but you can actually change the world you live in, which I mean your actual region. What are you doing to do that? And Kingdom Mapping doesn't just look at where you're standing and where you live and were raised, but it looks at all areas. It looks at the history of the area too. And because the history of this land was treated a certain way, it's going to bear fruit in a certain way. We had issues with integration because the Indians and the Seminoles, right, the Seminole Indians, plus the slaves who lived here were driven out by some of the early white settlers who came to Orlando and drove them to the south, which became the Everglades, and that built up what? South Florida. Because of that, it caused great bloodshed that still happens in that part of town. Although Sam Jones made a great impression on the community with education, he could not stop, unfortunately, the racial violence that came up in that space. Even though the whites and the blacks both went to church, there was still bloodshed happening. And I want to subscribe to you. If you are living in a region where you see darkness, please check out the history, because what happens on the ground speaks to the earth. We know that it says, even in the book of Genesis, that when Cain, killed Abel, the Lord said to him, I can hear what? Abel's blood crying out from the ground. So even the things that have happened before you got here still affect the way you live. And so Kingdom Mapping looks at, man, what happened before you got here and what can we do to make it better, right? And then, of course, we have the areas where Disney World now sits, which is called Lake Buena Vista. That's a whole city amongst itself. It actually doesn't have to pay taxes. That was actually reversed recently after years of being here. So just the decisions of the power brokers can affect the way you live. So you need to start thinking, can I do something? Is there a blueprint in me to change where I live? And I want to subscribe to you that there is. Anything and anywhere you are at is an assignment. And so just like we saw our country, if you go to any major city in Florida or anywhere around the country, if you go downtown, including the famous Manhattan, you'll always see one-way streets going one way, one-way streets going another way. You see these beautiful buildings that surround certain areas. You'll always have, a First Street or a Main Street or a First Avenue. You always have these certain things. You have the trees and the lakes. These are blueprints that the world came up with. But what does God want to do? How does he want to expand his kingdom to match and mirror on earth as it is in heaven? So this podcast will be talking about everything and anything tied to history, tied to culture and the land. And it will challenge you, what can I do in my own area? So I want to thank you for joining me next today on the Kingdom Mapping Podcast. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can reach me at, oh Lord, I didn't think this through. Can we stop recording? If you have any questions, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go.
Let's count down.
Go.
Okay. So if you ever have any questions or thoughts on what you heard or what you'd like to do or suggestions, please reach out to me at nix@fortifytheland.com. So that's nxx@fortifytheland.com. So we just appreciate you tuning in this time. Our next episode, we are going to be speaking to Pastor Judy Braylon. She was a former First Lady. Her and her husband helped start one of the biggest churches in one part of the city, and they ended up not just stewarding their people in their region, but a whole area. And they were able to influence the leaders and what's to come for the next 30 years, starting just how we started here. We look forward to having you around next time. Thanks for joining.